We have a great group today. Thank you for your great presentation, AG. I've had the pleasure of working with AG down at the Great Park with the Agricultural Advisory Board for a number of years. So I've gotten a lot of his expertise and opinions and perspectives. We also have another couple great panelists, Erica Block, which from Ann Arbor. Thanks for being here again. This is a treat. Dear friend Michel Agaze, who I've worked with on the Value Added and with the Food Makers Hub in Los Angeles of getting people to the marketplace, AG, as I mentioned. And then I've got a stranger, which we were supposed to meet, but, you know, whatever, we didn't. I was looking for parking lot 4. So, but we have
looking
John
for you.
I know. I said, be there at 8:30 so we can chat. So John Mesko has come out from Minnesota, which the tie-in there is that I spent my formative high school years in getting snowed in. So you barely got out in time, it looked like.
Yeah, we almost didn't.
But it is funny to see from that perspective of, wow, a foot of snow. I mean, that happened every day. The wow was like 7 feet. Then you would get excited. So anyway, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. And it's actually really good to be back here. One of the things I love about coming to Seedstock is that it is focused on action and solutions rather than sort of discussion. So I appreciate that. So I'm Erica Block. I'm the founder of Local Orbit. And Local Orbit is a technology platform for what we call a connected new food economy. And I'll give you a little bit about what we've done over the last 2 years and where we're evolving. So we've built a set of sales and business management tools to support the entrepreneurs who are coming up with new ways of aggregating and distributing food. So that would be an independent distributor, a woman with a truck who picks up from farms and delivers to restaurants, producer co-ops that are kind of connecting. There's somebody who's managing a group of farmers or other food producers, building relationships between them and buyers, food hubs, which is sort of a term I think we're going to talk about, and even farmers markets that are starting to leverage their space in a community as an opportunity to increase wholesale sales. So basically we give people a set of business management tools to operate their businesses, and then all of those markets effectively on our platform are connected so people can trade collaboratively across the markets. But one of the things that we've noticed over the last couple of years is that there are a lot of large institutional purchasers, universities, hospitals, even hotels like Hilton and Hyatt and Marriott who are purchasing from our customers on the Local Orbit platform, but they're placing very tiny orders in comparison to what we know they have to be sourcing. And so we've started to look at what some of the obstacles to institutional procurement from local and regional food providers are. And as a result, we're in the process of releasing a new product built on our platform called Localize, which provides vendor management services that will enable institutions to streamline their sourcing, not only from individual producers, but even from aggregators, because there's a lot to do with the management of the procurement process. So that's where we are today, kind of growing from supporting the little guys who are relocalizing at a very small level and connecting them, and now starting to work with institutions that have different needs. But again, it all works on the same platform.
Michel?
Morning, everyone. My name is Michel Algazi. I'm CEO of Freshology and also founder of Food Centricity. Food Centricity is a food business accelerator that's been around for a number of years. With collaboration with Dwight and Kimberly at Whole Foods, we've grown that a group called the Food Maker Hub, formerly the Fine Foods Group, to have about 1,300 member companies here in Southern California, all of them early stage food companies. And so as a result of having worked with early stage food companies for a number of years, I partnered with some great real estate developers, and I'm a co-founder of LA Prep. LA Prep is a facility that some of you visited yesterday. It's the very first of its kind multi-tenant food production environment that's going to house about 53 or 54 food companies starting in January here in LA. So small food makers are going to have a fully certified environment in which they can produce products with a wholesale permit. This is going to enable hundreds of food companies that have not been able to penetrate the wholesale market at a small scale. It's going to allow them to do that. So as part of the food accelerator that we are putting in place, we're going to have an aggregation model for ingredients and components, as well as other systems to allow companies to become more efficient. So thanks for having me here today.
Thanks, Michelle. And AG, since we got your bio before, why don't you share with us your favorite project that you're currently working on?
This model at the Great Park, at the Orange County Great Park, and please do come and visit, is this idea if people could come and see that there's a farm and food lab where you can create in your backyard. It's for the average citizen to show all kinds of different systems of how you might transform your backyard into a food production system. The next system, which was that picture, that nice with the rainbow that you saw, was an urban farm model that's on basically 5 acres of little mini blocks. 5 acres is custom growing food for the food bank, and we're utilizing that to teach young new farmers, not necessarily young, but new farmers how to farm, and also linking it together with teaching veterans how to farm as well. Then alongside of that is a 1 acre piece that is bringing in a bunch of different hydroponic, aquaponic, and other kind of grow systems that lend themselves to urban farming, and we're taking a hard look at that. In addition to that, then on the Great Park itself is at this point about a 60-acre farm that is commercial in nature. And so our company, which is we're a medium-sized family farm business with my brother and I are the owners of a company that's been around in that area for a long time. We started out as rural, and then we were suburban, and now we're urban, I guess, because we're that's the way it goes. But we're there, and our thought was this project was to showcase exactly that. What does 21st century agriculture look like in these 3 different glimpses of ag systems? And it's a lot of fun to be a part of it, and we have great support from the city of Irvine in being there. So it's been fun.
And I can just heartily recommend getting down there. It's a great place. John?
Yes, thank you for hosting us here again. This is my second trip to Seedstock. Last year, we kind of had the similar experience of getting out of Dodge. We actually left Monday, and we were wondering if we'd make it to the airport in Minneapolis. Most of the time, the weather forecasters in Minnesota overpredict. I think it's a conspiracy because they say, stay tuned. So, we're going to have the snow of the century. Stay tuned. So don't turn your dial. And then it turns out to be, a much smaller snowstorm. Well, they missed this one. This was 1 to 3 inches Sunday night. It'll melt by morning. No morning commute problems at all. The real snow is going to come in the afternoon on Monday. Well, we woke up Monday morning at our place, and it was a blizzard. And we had planned to leave at 10:30, I think, and it was all we could do to get out the door. I really opened the garage door and wished I'd had the snowblower running. So we're grateful to be here. I need to kid Jason that I'm the Midwest fix kind of for this conference, but you all are our warm weather fix. We're happy to be here and enjoying this a lot. My life's work is really to address the issues of food and farming in such a way to make farming profitable enough to be sustainable. And hopefully we'll get to explore that throughout the conference today. I work in 3 main areas. My wife, who's with me here today, Lisa, and our 2 daughters, one of which is here, Sarah. We farm Lighthouse Farm. We raise grass-fed beef in east central Minnesota. And so we contribute to that issue by producing a high-quality product and selling it at a price that reflects that quality and the effort that goes into it. The other thing that I do is with the Sustainable Farming Association. It's a nonprofit organization that really is focused on farmer-to-farmer networking. And if I could sum up what we do into 2 main areas, we provide professional development opportunities and training for farmers in a very non-conventional way. And then our other focus is on building and training farmers to build soil health. And the extension of that, the home run, as I like to call it, is if we can incorporate the value of the soil building efforts and the value of the improved soil into the value of the land, then we may have a shot at making this thing more profitable. And then the third thing I do, which is really near and dear to my heart, is I'm also an adjunct professor of environmental science at University of Northwestern St. Paul. And there I have an opportunity to really bring people who aren't aware of the issues involving food, farming, agriculture, and the environment, and bring that circle, close that circle for them in their education.
Thank you, John, and thank you all. So, over the last few years, at Seedstock, it's primarily been focused on agriculture, which is always a starting point. So today, I would like to go into more of the economics and kind of joining together a different aspect, which we'll call the food makers. And how do we get more products, sell them locally to the marketplace? So the first question I would kind of like to have everybody answer, but differently. We don't get to have that. Yeah, I concur. Which is, what is, in order to achieve an economically robust system, we need a business plan. So what's the most important element of a business plan? And we're going to go in order.
Okay. So
Left.
I'm going to be very short, but I have 4 things. So it's the first, what?
So they have to have 5, 6, 7, and 8.
Okay.
That's,
Yeah.
ow.
Well, so the first is that I actually think it's got to be dynamic, and I think about business plans more as maps rather than scripts, and use tools. In fact, we actually, for local food distribution, have a set of tools with a business model canvas and a customer journey map, which we've adapted from tech for food systems. So again, what that allows for is flexibility, because I talk about building a company within the changing food system that's built on sort of an architecture of listening, because we don't know all the answers, and we don't know, with all the changes that we're seeing and that AG actually referred to, what it's going to look like. So you have to have a starting place, but it has to be dynamic. The numbers, your spreadsheet, it has to be a story. So every row in your spreadsheet has some kind of narrative attached to it related to your business. And then, actually, I'll just do 3. I'll skip one of them. I think that every business plan should have an incrementalist approach, particularly when you're trying to solve a big problem, like changing the food system or changing an entrenched distribution model, so that you've got a big vision, which is the goal, but that you've got step by step by step actions that you can actually achieve.
Thanks, Erica. Well, I've been working with small food entrepreneurs for 12 years, and my conclusion after this time is that very few people don't know what they don't know. Most people don't know what they don't know. And so, as a result, my most useful tool is a financial model that sets expectations. What's really important to me is that entrepreneurs have expectations, understand what the business will yield, when it will yield it, when they can expect to break even, when they can expect to bring people on to help them. In general, what happens with entrepreneurs is that they don't know how the business is going to behave over time, and therefore they're just reacting as opposed to planning. So a robust financial model is what we start with, and we think is the most important one. Set some expectations, set some assumptions based on other people's experience. That's why there's a need to bring other people into the conversation. The Food Maker Hub is an environment in which food makers collaborate and share experiences and best practices. There's really not a roadmap that's proven and that's written, and so just collaboration with other entrepreneurs is the best way to get to that.
It's certainly no different for agriculture.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same solution set there is you have to have cost containment, cost estimates, and a realistic idea of what the different things that you'll be bringing in, your input costs, are going to cost. Then the next most important thing is, and it happens with us all the time, is you have to have your marketing done so that there's a demand exceeds supply at the very front end, because the worst thing is to produce a bunch of stuff that you have to throw away or give away, or you can't even get it to harvest because it costs you that much more to harvest it, and there's no marketplace for it. So you might have great ideas, but it always is driven, hopefully, by a good marketing plan.
Okay, so I'm glad you said that we had to come up with 4 ideas, because all of mine have been taken, except, which is a little unconventional, and I'm going to say an exit strategy. All too often, in my role as director of an association of farmers, I get the phone call from somebody who a month earlier gave no indication that they were on the ropes financially in their farm business, but they'll say, can you put the word out to the rest of the folks in our organization that we're going out of business and we're selling our animals, we're selling our processing equipment, we're going out. We need to be out of here in a week. This is not the way to end your business. Even if you have a successful business, it's the way to end your business is not to just quit and have an auction and exit. So an exit strategy that is focused on sustainability, not only of the business, but of the support system, the customers, and all those folks that rely on that business. I think that's really, really important. We see that all too often where that's not a part of the planning process and it only comes in right at the end. Well, at the end, sometimes, depending on where you're at in your age or what's going on in your family life, that you may not have the right mindset to make those good decisions at that time. In our neighborhood, what typically is happening is the older farmer, typically the male, passes away, and within a month, the widow has the land on the auction block, which that's about all she can do at that point. I mean, we don't take that away from anybody, but it would have been better to have a plan in place. And so I say, let's do an exit strategy from the beginning.
Terrific. So on that business model, what are reasonable expectations for gross sales and gross margins for a farmer, for a small startup food company? AG?
Well, we tend to look at ourselves as riverboat gamblers. We don't do much contract sales. So we play the market, but we're set up so that we think that we can have product every day. It's 52 weeks out of the year, and because we're in Los Angeles, not Southern California, I need to say, we're blessed that we can harvest them year round, and we're willing to see those markets go up and down. So some days the market, there'll be oversupply and you're actually losing money on every box that goes out. Some days then you're breaking even on every box that goes out, and hopefully there's more of the days when you're actually making money on every box that goes out. You see a lot of movement towards, in the ag industry, towards trying to find that nice contract price. But a lot of times you're looking for windows. Sometimes people don't want to deal with you if you don't have the product all the time. And so going back to marketing, if you can set those market windows up correctly, plant accordingly to that to hit those windows. It might be a Thanksgiving market, it might be Easter market, it might be June, 4th of July market for corn. These are the kinds of things that you start to work with. And the margin then is you take it as, for many years, we've taken our lumps and we've had our great years and our bad years driven by not a true contract price set by somebody else or set years in advance or a year in advance or even months in advance. We find ourselves doing that more and more with percentages of our production, but we're more inclined to think, let's ride the market because we're in a good spot where the high perishability of the crops we go. And that's the other thing. If you have highly perishable crops, that tends to make the market more volatile, and then you start to see these peaks and valleys, whereas if it's a product that you can sit on for 3 months at a time or 4 months at a time or longer, or 2 months even, that's a whole different way of how you would go about selling it. So those are the differences. Depending on what you choose to grow might drive how you look at your margin.
So, but continuing on that of numbers, what's a reasonable sales figure for an annual sales for a beginning farmer that they can survive on, John?
Well, I think that's a great question. Our farm started 8 years ago, and the first year we netted, we grossed $12,000 the first year. Add to that some 2 part-time jobs, and we survived. Okay, but it took about 4 years before we were grossing $100,000. Had we not had that progression, somewhere in there we'd have to make a decision to either quit, reduce, or make a change to the plan. So I think what beginning farmers, and I'm speaking specifically from farmers, but I'm sure this would apply to somebody in the food business as well. There's a lot of passion, a lot of energy. I want to get started. I'm excited about this. I'm willing to work for less than what a standard wage is. But I think we very easily forget, our 15-year-old daughter is here with us. The day we started farming, she was just, wasn't even as tall as this table. And now we're starting to talk about college. Oh, look at UCLA, isn't that nice? And that time goes by so quickly. And we need to realize that if our businesses don't progress income-wise enough to accommodate for that, and then we're not a sustainable business. So I would say, as a starting point, median income in the United States is somewhere between 40 and 50,000, depending where you live. Most people have two incomes, or most families have two incomes. Well, then a business ought to be netting 100,000 at some point in its lifespan. Hopefully, early enough that you're providing the lifestyle that your family needs. Cisco is an 18% gross margin. McDonald's and et al. Fast food is between 10 and 20%. So, that 10 to 20% gross margin is where a lot of food businesses are. There's no reason why a local, regional, sustainable business should settle for a smaller margin than that just because of the passion and the energy around what we're doing. I think that only gets you so far.
Thanks. That's perfect. Michelle, you want to talk about that from a food maker perspective?
Sure. For food makers, one of the things that has happened over the last 20, 30 years is that the cost of sale has been shifted from the retailers to the brand owners or the makers. And so it used to be that makers delivered to the dock, and that was the extent of their effort, right? So a starting gross margin of 20% was sufficient. But these days they have to bear the cost of selling through, of returns, of spoilage, of slotting fees or free fills, huge amounts of fees. So my recommendation to our food makers is to start with between 40 and 50% gross margin. When I mentioned that number, their eyes just roll up and they say, it's impossible, how can we achieve that? So that's why we're working on also helping them procure ingredients at a lower cost by aggregating demand, having a buying group help them get better cost for ingredients. We're also working very carefully with them on designing the right product the right time. A lot of food makers start with a product that is the result of a family recipe, and so they start with a product that's too expensive to make that results in a very high cost that is produced at a high cost. So we work with them with the help of food scientists to bring the cost down and create a product that's scalable. If they do not do that the first time, there's really not a chance for them to have a second chance in the market once the product is on the shelf. So those two elements are extremely important. And so the expectation of a 40 and 50% margin is critical for food makers to make it in the marketplace.
So follow that up with, what's the nut? What's the annual gross sales?
Well, that
in order to achieve this standard of living, would a food maker expect to need to achieve?
Well, doing back of the envelope numbers, right? If you, at the end of the day, if you can sustain a 10% net margin, you're in good shape. And that means that you need $1 million in gross to be able to have a decent income, at least here in Southern California. So that's the number, $1 million in gross. And the question is whether you can achieve that with regional sales. I think the answer is yes. We have the luck of having 20 million consumers around the corner, so we can expand local businesses to try to reach that number.
Thank you. And Erica?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that $1 million in gross tends to be the number that food hubs and aggregators use to get to some level of sustainability or viability. So I think it's a question, I think that you can't answer this globally. This is really about a regional issue, and it depends on what part of the country you're living in. It depends on whether you're paying a mortgage on your land. It depends on whether you've inherited your land. It depends on the tax base. There's a lot of different things that go into it, but...
Well, we're all living in Westwood,
yeah,
so
you guys are, yeah. It's a 50% margin seems good. But what I would say in terms of margin is that it's something that can grow over time as you develop efficiencies and collaborative relationships, as you leverage the community that you're a part of, and the partnerships which will help you spend less, so your margins will increase. And then I think this is a broader conversation, but to Michelle's comments about paying for slot space and the warehousing that goes with distribution is, I think, we're working with people and we're looking at how do you not get rid of the middle of the supply chain, the distributors per se, but how do you make the distribution or the supply chain leaner so that the producer or the grower gets a larger share of the final dollar for the sale. And that's a lot of what the updates to regional food systems and regional supply chains, that's what people are working on. You need a middleman, but there are efficiencies that can happen with better relationships. And then also, quite frankly, with technology that we didn't have access to before in terms of just-in-time communication and many different things technology can do.
So you have your hub camps. So what kind of sales are you looking at generating? That $1 million, is that kind of a combined sales from all the different producers that you're representing?
Yeah, so what we do is we actually have a set of boot camps that we have a sort of 3-day process where we take people who are interested in aggregation and local distribution in a very lean way, and we say, okay, here are the sort of core things you need to think about. How do you do this from a bootstrap perspective? And what we also say is, what do you have to invest, or what are your expectations in terms of growth, and whether that you self-finance, whether you can work on your savings, or whether you get funding or financing. Commonly, you hit about $1 million in sales, and that might lead, depending on the services that the hub is offering, say one person could effectively make $50,000 in income off of that $1 million in sales, but all the producers in that network are also making money off of those sales. So if you're talking about $1 million to give one person a good living, that does seem to be what works across the country. There isn't a lot of aggregate data, but that's the anecdotal data.
So simply put, it's kind of, if you had 10 Johns at 100,000, then
Yep.
one should be able to make that aggregation piece
Yeah.
work.
And then maybe John is doing, whatever his margins are, he's making a living. So if you have 10 producers that are part of a co-op, and you've got one person in the middle who's helping get that to market, and again, this depends on the cost of transportation, it depends on many different variables, but fundamentally, if you had 10 producers selling $100,000 worth of product, and they had their costs down, and you have the efficiencies of some kind of aggregation model, then the person who's in the middle of that can also make a reasonable living. Absolutely possible.
Terrific. Let's look at big versus small. And AG has always been a good mentor with me on that one of big isn't necessarily bad, so I get that. But when it comes to food makers, everybody thinks big in terms of getting into big food. Farmers can think small because they're thinking about what you can manage, what you can grow, whether you're saying, my left arm for 40 acres that are together. That is not a huge farm. That's not a big plot, but a person can make a living with that. Michelle, how do we switch this mindset for food makers to think small, to think of that 1 million to 1.5 million in sales? Because a lot of times when we do our classes, we ask, how much do you have to make? And there's just a blank look. And I said, so you're all after world domination? And it's like, yeah, that's it. And that's not happening.
Well, that's a great question. Most food makers' first experience in the marketplace is farmers markets maybe, and then eventually they go to a trade show. And then they have visits from people from all over the country, and the lure of having bi-coastal or national distribution is very strong. So a lot of them end up seeking that national or bi-coastal distribution immediately. They're not ready for it. And so what we do at the Food Maker Hub and Food Centricity, everything that we do as well with Whole Foods, is to convince makers that there's enough of a market here locally, that depth of distribution is much better than breadth of distribution. The cost of getting products across the nation is extremely high. The amount of service they need to provide to stores to make sure that products sell through is extremely high. So the closer they are to the point of sale, much the better. So what we try to focus on is quality of distribution. Local is perfectly fine. There's enough of a market for them to make it here locally. And they really need to focus on the quality of distribution. And then substantiation, the only thing that's going to allow them to command a 40 or 50% gross margin is substantiation of value through great packaging, great communication, good branding, great storytelling. Erica was talking about storytelling. Storytelling for us in terms of packaging and every part of every touch point in the communication with the consumer is extremely important to be able to substantiate a price premium. In general, our makers need to understand that their product is going to be priced at a premium level, at the beginning at least, and they need to substantiate that value through great marketing.
Thank you. AG, let's talk about specialty products and crops versus commodities. You know, with the food movement, expectations are of this farm to table, but at the same time, people want to spend commodity prices that monoagriculture has given us. So, how do we create that change?
If you're fortunate to be, well, no, it doesn't matter where you are in the country or in the world. A good example is you go and talk to the master gardeners in an area, and you find out what they're growing in their backyards, and that gives you a huge list of things that you can grow anywhere in the country. That they have already gone through the process of selecting seeds and varieties that work for a local production system, and now the question is, can you scale that up? And are they items that no one's grown for 20, 30, 50, 60 years in their region? Good examples here in Orange County. You know, Orange County used to produce apricots, it used to produce walnuts, it used to produce asparagus 30 years ago. It used to produce a bunch of different items that they eventually quit in the commodity world because they couldn't compete with other regions of the state or other countries. And so you realize that, aha, there's a great capacity for bringing new products back, they're not old products back, get them back into the mainstream and see if you can't find the right marketing structure where someone will support you. I know with a lot of the handful of growers that are left in Orange County, those of us were there, we looked to our left, we looked to our right, and our friends and other families have all gone out of business. But for those of us that are left, there's a handful of systems, different structures that are working really well. A lot of my friends have gone back to a CSA or the roadside stand model, including agricultural tourism as a part of it, and they're thriving. They're doing great. Those of us that are trying to stay within the model, we've jettisoned and quit growing products that we're really good at, but we couldn't compete because they were commodities, and we've stayed with the highly perishable products. And more importantly, we've had great support from the local regional food chain stores and restaurants and distributors, because that fresh product that can be delivered same-day harvest, doesn't matter if it's organic or conventional, they recognize that they have value with a product that was harvested the same day. It lasts longer in their shelves, they can taste the difference, they can see the differences, and as long as we can be consistent in that delivery, they seem willing to pay a little bit more for that extra value. So you've had value by being local then. And we thought we would have seen that 30 years ago, but it's really on this last 5, 10 years that it started to really play out, that was something that allows us to be excited about being here and not wanting to go anywhere else. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it just makes me think of, why don't we have good tasting tomatoes all year round instead of the varieties that were made so that they could be shipped, to Minnesota.
I have some
Jump
data.
in.
So I'm actually, I think there's some macro statistics. So if you look at some of the numbers that are some of the sort of growth in food sales over the last dozen years, local food has been growing 18 to 20% market share year over year, while conventional food has flatlined. And people, there's study upon study, and I don't have my references with me, but consumers are willing to pay a premium for local. It's probably not the 15 to 20% that used to be the premium for organic. That's going down. But at the same time, the cost of conventional food is going up with the cost of oil and transport. So the gap between the prices is slightly reducing. And then, 7 out of 10 people surveyed by the National Restaurant Association are more willing to patronize a restaurant that sources local. So that becomes a marketing opportunity. Universities are actually competing with students to some degree on the sustainability and the local aspects of their food programs. Hospitals are doing the same thing. Corporate dining facilities are actually using it as an employee perk. They're using wellness programs around local. So there are these macro trends that are starting to shift the story, and I think that that everybody who's selling a product or helping people sell a product, I think really can focus on getting that message out, so that and actually providing the buyers, especially if it's a wholesale buyer, the tools they need to be able to market the product. So whether it's a shelf talker for a grocery store that has the story of the farm or the food maker, or a table tent for a restaurant, that kind of material, which actually is pretty lightweight to create and produce, yields huge benefits in return on investment.
And yeah, I was going to ask you, John, specifically introducing grass-fed beef, which beef has always been a commodity. Now you have a commodity that's now a specialty product. Mm-hmm. How did you create that demand?
You just took me off from where I was going to go, but I'll come back to that. We didn't create the demand, obviously. We stumbled into that. We actually started farming. Our goal was to have an agritourism business. That's what we were going to do. And very quickly realized there's just not enough cars going by the road to generate enough income. And so we went to a very small local food co-op, and we were there to shop for food for us. And I just asked them off the top of my head, do you have any beef for sale? Oh, we've been looking for a beef supplier. And I said, well, we'll supply you beef. And okay, great. Well, then I went home and bought some animals. So we actually had the market before we had the animals. And just as an aside, that's a great way to start your marketing plan. I really believe this. Have the market in place before you even buy an animal. So it was really easy to jump into that. We've set a goal of pricing our product at 90% or higher than the highest priced product in the marketplace. We just did that. We didn't do any math other than just saying this is a premium product because we're the ones doing it. Okay, we're doing it. It's grass-fed, it's unique, and it's a family business, and that's what we're going to sell. So if you go to our website, you see, you probably wouldn't recognize her, but you see a little drawing of Sarah there that Lisa put together as part of our logo. It's a family business. It's what we do. We also cultivate that relationship with our customers through a regular e-newsletter that goes out. And we've gotten to the point now where we're still growing our business. Obviously, my work takes up a lot of my time, so we're not growing as fast as we were, but it's still growing. Our customers are now repeat customers for many years, and the same families, the same people that buy from us have continued to. And so now we have built this real deep loyalty, family to family, which is almost impenetrable. That it's very, very a good way to be in the business, but you just don't develop that overnight. So part of it is the story, part of it is the narrative that goes with what we're doing, part of it is the kind of the customer service and the relationship that goes along with it. But if I could just take another minute, Dwight, and go into where the direction I was going to go, and that is related to beef. So I think you may have all heard recently, within the last year, that McDonald's has said they want to have a certain percentage of their beef be sustainable by 2016 or 2017, something like that. Well, guess what? They're not going to pay a dime more for that beef. I mean, we all know this, right? The price of a Big Mac is based on where the demand and the supply curves for Big Macs crossed. That's what defines the price of a Big Mac or any other commodity product, any product. Prices are set by supply and demand, not by necessarily us as producers saying, we're going to price our product based on cost plus a margin. I mean, we can think about that, but at the end of the day, it's supply and demand that determines how much people will pay for a Big Mac. And know that none of us eat Big Macs in here because we're all into local and sustainable and healthy food. But has anybody ever seen a McDonald's restaurant close? Okay? These people know what they're doing, okay? They know where to put the restaurant, they know when to put it in there, and they don't close them. And they're not going to sit back and let all of us gobble, they're not going to let me take their Big Mac business, okay? At home, we make the world's best hamburgers with our beef, but they're not going to let me steal their business. And so they're going out and they're defining what sustainable beef is. They are going to not sit back and let this happen. So I think it's important for us to remember if we're going to, we're not going to take that away from them. We've got to figure out a way to get the Walmarts of the world, the McDonald's of the world, whether it's genuine or not, we've got to get them to invest in building soil health, to restoring and returning back to the environment what they're taking away and what other big businesses are taking away. So we've got to integrate, in addition to everything we're talking about here today, we've got to continue to look for ways to integrate, whether it's through credits and payments from corporations that are harming the environment, so that support soil building practices on farms. We've got to figure a way to put more money in the bucket of the local, regional, sustainable farming economy than what's there. Because when, or if and when McDonald's says we're going to produce a sustainably raised Big Mac, they're going to pay the farmer a dime more for that meat. And so there's no more money in the system to produce that meat. McDonald's is going to ensure that they're going to extract the value through creating maybe more technology or better efficiencies or buying it from someplace else. Right now, McDonald's has bought a farm in Ireland, and they're working with the Irish Department of Agriculture to define sustainable and what kind of practices will be their sustainable beef. And so this is their business model. They're not going to sit back and wait for us to answer their questions for them. They're going to do it themselves.
So on that note, how do we market these concepts to the growers and to the food makers, such as soil health?
Well, what we're doing in Minnesota,
and sustainability.
Yeah, what we're doing in Minnesota and throughout the Midwest, in our work as an association, is very easily demonstrating a profit, an enhanced capacity for farmers to make money by investing in soil health. We're more productive, we're more resilient. Global climate change has created some severe weather events in the Midwest, as it has here, or lack thereof, in some ways. And we're easily demonstrating the value of a focus on soil health, diversity of cropping systems, a combination of row crops, cover crops, and livestock grazing, reintroducing livestock onto the corn soybean farms in the Midwest has made a tremendous improvement in the productive capacity, the environmental ecosystem services capacity of those farms. And so it's just a matter of farmers convincing other farmers, hey, look, I did this and it's working. And it's really taking off. I mean, it's a snowball for us in the Midwest to keep up with information on that. So I think, number one, we have to convince farmers, and it's not that hard, that making that investment is profitable. And if we can, again, put more money in the system, I think that benefits farmers, it benefits people downstream, and consumers ultimately.
So the almighty dollar at the end of the day is the marketing tool.
I mean, it only gets you so far. The passion for doing it the right way, that might get one generation of farm business. But if that's all you have, the next generation is going to say, well, I worked really hard for doing it the right way, and I don't have anything now.
So they need to be combined. You're going to jump in and jump in there on AG, but I also want to go into, as we lead this, is how do we get these concepts and get grown products into our local food makers? Because this is a huge empty piece that I'm saying, is that we have to convince all these local food makers to use locally sourced products. Right. We're working on restaurants, but we have another area, which are the small food makers.
I think I wanted to make sure to say that in my remarks earlier that as much as our systems can improve, the convenient thing to say that everything's broken is still hard to agree to, only because, here's the best example, we had a Turkish minister from Parliament, he was the Ag chairman, I guess, recently come visit us at the Great Park, and with him he was one of the owners of the oldest, one of the oldest continuous food companies in Turkey, was with him, and we were sitting there talking about, and they were here on a drought tour, because they've got a drought, we've got a drought, and they're trying to find out what's happening, and what's the challenge for drought. What was really remarkable was the guy from the continuous food company says, "Oh yeah, this next year we're celebrating our 800th year of continuous operation." Going back to the Ottoman Empire, and we kind of looked at each other saying, we're saying that people have to eat. They have to eat every day. There's a tremendous amount of calories that have to be produced somewhere on the planet every day to feed the people we have. So the system that we have is not perfect. The system we have has to improve, has to continue to recognize that you can't go down a path that destroys the productivity of your land, or you need to find new ways of creating productivity with water, with sunlight, and with nutrients, especially where we're going to get the nutrients. Well, that's another challenge that we have. So putting that puzzle together is what we're all about, even here in this conference. And at the local side of it, then, I'll be the first to say that there is so much great pent-up demand for these products that can be produced. And when people taste the difference of a very fresh product, they really see it. I'm a very good celery grower, but as a celery grower in the commodity world, I'm the high-cost producer in Southern California, and we quit. We quit growing celery because I didn't have my marketing right. It's not that I couldn't grow it right. I could grow it great, but I was the high-cost producer. I rent land. I pay high water costs. So a guy that owns his land and has a well, he immediately has an enormous advantage over my production, even though celery to celery, I'm as good as anybody could ask for. So we're still caught, those of us that are producers, and to some extent those that are makers too, you're still caught. You have a product, you have to sell it, and you have to sell it at the right price. If you are lucky enough or fortunate enough or smart enough to create a great marketplace where people are convinced that they will pay you a fair price that helps you, and aside from what your production costs are, recognize that they want you to stay in business. And that's maybe where the chains, the restaurant, those folks that we're working hand in hand with, is if the recognition is we don't want you to go out of business. Of course, we don't want you to gouge each other. I guess that would be the question you ask. Can that relationship, that symbiotic relationship, have multiple benefit, and can that move forward? And I think that's what this discussion is about. And the answer is, in certain areas, in many areas, it's yes. There's really neat partnerships that are happening all over the country, and you're seeing some folks thrive as small regional producers, and you want to continue to see that model. Can it be replicated, I think is what you're asking.
Well, but just also down to the specifics. How does Michel get one of his food makers to get your green beans to pickle them? How do we get any number of pickle makers, for example, that I've talked to 20 of them, and they're all just buying on the marketplace and getting it as cheaply as possible. So there's nothing special about the cucumbers they're getting. So that's my question, is how do we get locally grown products to be sold in a value-added setting, as well as in just the fresh to market, to school, to retail?
Well, that's what we're doing, is actively creating aggregation points and more communication. One of the things that we're working on, as you know, Dwight, because you and I have been working on this as well, is to start establishing an umbrella brand, a set of standards that food makers may follow when they create products, and that may include some sustainable practices as well as sourcing practices, and try to create an umbrella brand, a seal of approval, a seal that we can put on labels of food makers that would indicate that the product has fulfilled certain requirements in terms of sourcing and sustainability. So that part on the branding side is important, and we can promote that to the consumer. And then setting up aggregation points and ways for growers and makers to communicate. And that's what we're doing with the Food Maker Hub, and I know that Erica is doing that as well with Local Orbit.
So, I think that what I like to do is sort of step back, and I think it's deconstructing the way people are already doing things, and that's what's happening, and that's what Michelle is working on. It's what we see happening. So last week I was sitting, I moderated a supply chain panel at a new local food association, national association, which is really the first business-to-business trade association that I've seen come up in the country. One of the guys on the panel, a guy named Rick Tarian, has put together a series of kitchen incubators and food production businesses in Wisconsin. So he said 1/3 of the produce that's grown in Wisconsin is tilled under because there's no market for it. And so what they've been trying to do is capture what's been tilled under and turn that into the products for the value-added chain and build either the regional brand around it or work in partnership with individuals that already need that product for their brand. And so again, that's not happening as much in California, but around the country there's a tremendous amount of food waste which needs to be captured.
So what's
So
the infrastructure
so
for
his
that?
infrastructure, and this is, so his infrastructure is getting out and going to farms, and it's very labor intensive, and he didn't know about me, and he said, this is, we need to communicate the product availability and then aggregate it in places where not only does the say the grade B or the grade C produce that gets turned into a really good value-added product go, but it also connects with other market opportunities. And I'll give you one other example where this has worked within one of the organizations that Local Orbit has supported, is we supported essentially a food hub or two food hubs that were linked that sold high-end products to white tablecloth restaurants, but they also sold seconds for preparation for Meals on Wheels and Head Start programs. But because the supply chain and the distribution method was combined, you could afford to have the lower cost products get to market as efficiently as the higher cost products. So people are, again, reducing the number of steps. They're finding ways to have the different sales channels cross-pollinate and create efficiencies within the delivery and in the ordering process. So from a communications perspective, a lot of this really is about knowing what's available, telegraphing the demand, even being able to say, if I've got pickles and it's November and I know that you're going to have those pickles ready for me in July. That's when the cucumbers are going to be the lemon cucumbers I want. I can send out an order, and you can do this through our system. I can send that order out, so there's a purchase order, there's a commitment for this number of pickles at this point in time, and then there's all the reminder infrastructure and the traceability to go along with it. So I think some of it really does come down to technology once the relationships are established.
So relationships first. Well,
Can I
we've just
jump
been
in just a
given
second?
our things. So what I'm going to have is, and we'll continue down. We can start with Michelle. Is any last statements before we go to general Q&A? So.
Thanks, Dwight. I just wanted to mention that the largest tenant at LA Prep is LA Kitchen. You're going to hear from Robert Egger later on today. And what makes that environment really great and has that potential of connecting the growers, the local growers with local makers, is having someone like LA Kitchen help with minimally processing agricultural output and making it available to food makers in a cost-effective way. So to have ecosystems such as LA Prep with LA Kitchen is extremely important. And as we talk about creating centers of excellence or clusters of food innovation throughout the state and throughout the nation, it'd be great to think about not only the processing side through local food makers, but also ways in which we can put people to work at minimally processing produce and making that available in a cost-effective way to local food makers.
Me?
Yeah.
I would say that you look at this room, for example, if all the people in that room were buyers of produce representing chain stores, small stores, restaurant chains, institutional buying, maybe cafeterias, you'd be representing millions of people. If people on this side were the individual buyers that I want to attract to my roadside stand or my CSA, I have to be able to sell each one of you consistently something, and the market dollars immediately you can tell the difference in the line. What am I going to produce to meet this market? What am I going to produce to meet that market? And that starts to dictate where you want to go with your operation. There's some of us that straddle that line a little bit, and we're trying to get into both spaces, or we've been in both spaces, and we recognize in many ways they're two different businesses. Doesn't mean they're not compatible, but they really require a lot of attention for if you have employees or if you're trying to do it by yourself. For the folks that I think that are out there, how many producers are in the room that actually are growing something for sale? Good, there's a handful. It's becoming that there's great opportunity, I think, tremendous opportunity because of the interest around wellness to environmental correctness to carbon footprint, for example, and this idea that helping your local economy is a great stimulant. And I think you're not just going to see it away. It's not a phenomenon anymore. I'm truly believing that it's an absolutely part of the way we're going to feed ourselves. If I can get macro for a second, there's a description that, in the future, in the 20, 30, 40, 50 years, everybody's going to start migrating towards big cities and away from urban, rural areas. And you start thinking about it and you go, I don't think so, because if a rural area in Minnesota or anywhere can support their own food system, their own energy system, their own water systems, why would anybody, other than to go visit an urban area, a heavy metropolitan area, why would anybody want to go there if they can get there when they want to? But the added value of living outside in smaller, robust, vibrant communities that have everything you would want to have, that, I think, is the model that many of us, anyway, are believing that's the sustainable model that this world will have access to and be able to build. And I think whether it's in Africa, whether it's in India, or whether it's right here in the United States, that's what's available to us. And you're seeing that those toolboxes that we talked about are just opening up, and we're finding some great ways to do it. For those that are determined to stay in an urban area, people need to eat, and so if you can get the 1 to 5% of the 25 million people that are here to buy your product, that's a great marketplace for you to start, right? All you need is 1%, and that's a lot of people. 1%, what's 1% of 25 million? So.
I would agree with that. I'll just tack onto that a little bit. Why would you go visit an urban area if you had everything you needed in a rural area? You wouldn't. Problem is, we don't have everything we need in the rural areas. We live an hour outside of the Twin Cities. Now, Minneapolis and St. Paul is not LA, but it's a pretty big part of the Midwest, and we're just an hour outside. We do not have high-speed internet at our house. And so when my daughter wants to take an online class in economics from the University of Minnesota, it's not going to work. So that's a strike against rural living, right? So the next generation says, I'm not sure I want to live in rural areas. I don't like this, okay? So we definitely, and Jason and I were talking about this earlier, broadband internet. If you have anything to do with that, does anybody in the room have anything to do with that? Let's get that done. Let's get that done. And satellite internet is not broadband internet to us on the farm. You can put it on top of the silo, but when the rain or the 6 inches of snow come, the internet goes out. The other thing I'll just, at the risk of being somewhat controversial, and I don't mean to be, I think the hydroponics work that's been highlighted here by Seedstock is phenomenal. I think the urban agriculture ideas are fantastic. We see a lot of that in the Twin Cities as well. If for any reason other than, or should I say this, if the only reason we want to keep regular agriculture in regular soil active and thriving, it's for ecosystem services. If we don't have an active and productive soil health focus in a significant portion of our food growing areas, whether or not that actually contributes to food because some of these great technologies have replaced some of that production, that's fine. But we still have to have that soil actively processing carbon, actively producing those ecosystem services. So let's not forget about all of that as well. Pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you. And real quick.
Okay, I'll be real quick. So actually, I'm going to take this out to the macro. We spend $1.75 trillion a year on food purchases, both retail and wholesale in this country. And about 60% of that is in the food service industry. So there really is a demand that's being telegraphed by institutions, by consumers, by pretty much everybody for at least 20% local. That's one of those big goals you see. Mandates, you see incentive programs. So that's $350 billion a year. There's a huge market opportunity. There is a way to make this economically viable, even if it remains only a small percentage of the actual economy. And so I think that there's no question, since it's food, it's a repeatable market. It's something that everybody needs every day, 3 times a day or 5 times a day, depending on how you eat. It's there, and I think that global supply chains And global distribution networks have been successful because they've worked in a collaborative way and because they've built really sophisticated communications infrastructure to connect people. Walmart is a technology company through and through. That is what they excel at in supply chain management. The large non-food supply chains build networks where each of the players can connect to optimize the efficiency. And we didn't talk about hubs, but essentially the global supply chain is a network of hubs and spokes. There just aren't very many of them. We're talking about creating lots of hubs and spokes and lots of collaboration on a regional and local level. That's it.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our great panelists?
I had a quick question about.
Follow your own direction.
A real quick question. As companies like Walmart's names come up a bunch of times, as companies like Walmart and McDonald's to a lesser extent are starting to look at long-term contracts, how do you think that affects producers, and are there issues that we should be thinking about or advocating for as these companies move into these sort of modern sharecropping agreements, not to prejudice my thoughts?
You want to jump on that, AG?
I'd be the first to say that if the partnership between a large or regional or even a small customer is set up that they want you to stay in business, that you're not a replaceable supplier and you're not treated like a replaceable supplier, that would be the optimal way to see this movement move forward. And for those of us then that are growing, to again, as we mentioned, if your marketing is pretty well established and you know you're trying to meet a marketing goal with your production, so you've met your marketing goal, someone says, I'll pay you this for this much. Now your goal is, can I get the crop there? And as long as there's not penalty if you fail, where they take it out of your hide, which is some of the way it works with some of the middlemen that promise product for a certain price, and then suddenly when everybody runs out, that's why a box of lettuce or tomatoes goes up to $50, $60. It was guaranteed at some price, and now they're busy sourcing, trying to make sure they can fill that contract. These are the challenges for the grower. If you don't make your obligation, if you're not penalized for it, but you're in good faith trying to meet that agreement, those are good things, and that's actually, you're starting to see that handhold start to develop more and more than I've ever seen it before in these last few years.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, McDonald's has clearly said there's no premium in this system. So as McDonald's moves to sustainable beef, they have no intention of increasing the amount of money in the bucket. They're saying that the profit to the producer will come from efficiencies and market access. So adopting new technology, getting bigger, that's how we reward sustainable beef production. That's just beef, that's just one example. But I would agree, if you're seen as not as a replaceable cog in a wheel, but as a real viable entity, great. I don't know of a lot of producers that are selling direct to Walmart or McDonald's that are in that position, but it certainly could happen. So, you know, not to be oversimplistic, but despite the fact that there is a lot of demand, if you argue, or if you allow for the $350 billion of demand for local food, if you take 1 million farms, and there's more than 1 million farms in the U.S., but if you take 1 million farms, that's only $35,000 per farm, and that's about what net farm incomes are. So the math is already working there. There's just not enough money in the bucket.
Yes.
Well, first off, I think it's a phenomenal panel, and it's very thought-provoking. I'm going to concentrate with Eric and with local orbit and pivot on your last statement about global logistics. As it turns out, my day job is with UPS. UPS is not a food company, but it's really more of a warehousing logistics technology entity, just like you were talking about Walmart. So my first question is, have you actually talked with anybody? And I'm kind of a worker bee. I'm with UPS in Las Vegas, actually in the call center, not in a position of influence and authority for the company, but I do know through my networking people in global sales in Atlanta, the World Hub in Louisville. and particularly knowing what the local food movement is in Louisville in particular, that's a really good node in terms of the dialogue. So I want to suggest that to you if your national organization is not talking with UPS at World Hub in Louisville, given the influence of the mayor and everything that's going on with the local food hub there, that would be a really good place, and I can direct you to some people in Atlanta that you should talk with. Secondly, I'm really intrigued about your boot camp, because as I'm thinking here, as much as we're local-centric here, and I certainly am too, particularly looking at urban production in Las Vegas, and close with Nicola and the Indoor Ag Conference that's been there as well, the toolkits and the systems and the collaboration and the technology is still going to be global. The warehousing still has to take place locally and globally as well. So I'm really interested to hear Eric in particular talk more about the boot camp you have, because essentially we're the early adopters, we're the innovators that are trying to change the worldview of anchor institutions as to how they can interact with the local producers, whether it's the CSAs or the value-added producers. And I'll add one other point on this, and the long-winded question is when I try to deal with the USDA in Las Vegas, and here I'm in a town with 2 million people with a multi-billion-dollar food and beverage budget, and I have CSAs that are dying to expand, and the USDA says, we're rural in Las Vegas. That's just ludicrous, but it's a paradigm shift to understand the local production in an urban area like Las Vegas or a lot of other cities. So let me just kind of summarize my long-winded question. One is to Eric, have you talked with UPS or FedEx or entities like that are not traditionally in food, but they are in warehousing and logistics that are really important? And secondly, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the boot camp, and then I'll stop at that.
Thank you.
I'll be real quick on these points. So actually, the first thing, by the way, the USDA is complicated, and we can't go too far there. But they did add $100 million to support local food this year through the Local Food Promotion Program, and there's a lot of money that I think is being interestingly spent. And I'm a skeptic about a lot of those grants, but I think it's interesting to see the shift and the lobbying is there. Number two, transportation. So when I talked about business planning in terms of incrementalism and understanding how you can you go from point A to B to C before you get to your end goal, well, the next thing on our roadmap is integration with transportation systems, whether it's the big carriers or some of the smaller transportation that's available. So that is on our roadmap, but I would like to sort of follow up offline on that. Number three, the boot camp. There's information at localorbit.com. We actually are doing a boot camp in San Diego March 1st and one in Portland, Oregon in February. We're doing one in Denver next week. And the reason that the boot camps evolved was as we were working with these entrepreneurs, we understood that there was a lack of capacity in terms of growing businesses and thinking about things efficiently. And so this was designed as a way to help expand capacity in the space. But I will say we're big proponents of taking apart the warehousing and the storage as much as possible, that we're seeing that the less of that happens, the more direct the ordering and the delivery is, the more economically efficient it is, and the better the food. So that's something that we're thinking about.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we have time for 2 more here.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to find out from the panel what influence cooperatives or profit-sharing models have in that early question you talked about with margin and gross revenue, if you've had any experience with that or any thoughts around that.
Well, I was just going to say, cooperatives have been around for a long, long time, whether they're for producers that gather together for buying strength, for producers that come together in our company, for example, we would be called a grower shipper. So we represent 5 farming families along with our own production, and we do the sales out of our office. My brother does that, and it's an arrangement. It's a handshake. We're not legally bound with each other, but they trust us as a company to sell their product for them under our label. They're able to go ahead and sell their own product wherever else they want to if they want to, but the agreement has been to hang together because we think they think and we think that we can do better marketing together. So that's on the marketing side. On the purchasing side, you also have some scale of volume that helps you get products in cheaper because you can buy in bulk or at a larger volume. And so those are the simple things, and these go back to, into the early 1900s or even before, but especially 1920s, 30s is when you saw in the produce industry a tremendous amount of cooperatives start to form themselves where they could find some strength by being together. And that included making sure that they could move, talking about the transportation, push for better rates on transportation to move their product from place to place. It's hard when you're all by yourself and someone just perceives that you're just, a small producer and doesn't want to give you the time of day. But that strength that comes by being collaborative and cooperative is that kind of what you were asking? Is how do they form, or is it easy to form that?
Yeah, and specifically even profit sharing, like Winco's been in the news a lot. They're a food grocery store here in Southern California that has done profit sharing, so that the employees are actually making a living wage. And so I feel like a lot of the food jobs out there, it's, as you've all mentioned, it can be a real struggle to make a living wage. And so I'm kind of interested in that profit sharing model piece too.
Okay, that's what, I could talk a bit about that on the retail point, but that's what we weren't going into so much today. I mean, it's the living wage. Everybody knows that the closer you are to food, the less you make. Whether it's from being a harvester or somebody working in a restaurant or somebody working in a grocery store or so on. There's a big disparity within that. And you do have some cooperative grocery stores, but, I don't know in terms of what necessarily living wage is. And so the point of these conversations is that how can individuals and entrepreneurs be successful within that? And it's not overlooking what you're speaking about. It just wasn't the focus of that today. One last question here.
Hi. Recently, there was a disruption within the mayo industry with Hampton Creeks, and this is a question towards John. You were talking about defining sustainability as far as beef is concerned. What are your opinions on that, as far as like regulatory bodies that are involved in defining like what the mayo business is? Like, how do you also apply that, across to like beef industry as well?
Well, as a farmer, I'm probably not a big fan of regulation. And yet, as soon as we get big, then we have to standardize what we mean by our terms and what does sustainable mean and so forth. There's all kinds of entities that are trying to define these different labels: sustainable, grass-fed, eco-raised, or whatever it might be. And I think that's a hurdle. I think that as we scale up this whole idea of local food, something we're trying to do in the Midwest as well, is we're combining the production and we're combining the demand and the marketing of all of this, and everybody somewhere is going to want to put their brand or their label on it or their definition to it. And I think that's a real challenge, and when people disagree, then what ends up happening is somebody says, well, we need to regulate that. And so I think AG had a great example of a miniature co-op that was formed, where they have a handshake agreement that we're going to sell this product on behalf of your business through our label. Well, that's great. Nobody's involved in that. No one's in the middle of that. No one's poking their regulatory arm in there. And so the more that we can foster those kinds of things, I think it's better all the way around.
And I'll jump in on that a little bit, because you're talking about definitions. And I think the easiest way to go, and I think where the world is going, is on transparency. Who cares what it's called? Let me ask questions. So as a consumer, I become more educated. I can ask my grower, my producer, my distributor questions that will get to the answers that I want to get. Reading these wonderful consumer packaged good newsletters that come out. My favorite news that I saw a few weeks ago was on the term natural foods. And natural foods, as we know, is everybody's getting sued on using natural on your product. So natural foods is not a marketable approach in the U.S., but it's still good in China and Africa.
I mean, the transparency is, I mean, it's absolutely critical, and I think that we are in a position, you know, I'm going to be the optimist today. We're in an unprecedented position to be able to share information and to not just sort of say what the story is, but to show the audit trail as it tracks through the supply chain. All of that information can be revealed to all of us, and it's starting to happen. And I think that clarity and that access to information can get rid of a lot of the obstacles and barriers.
So anyway, we're done. Thank you very much.